Hey, so welcome back to the channel. Uh, this video is going to be about my life in my 20s, going through the United States Marine Corps. So by this point, if you watched the last video, you know that I already have a family and I'm trying to find a way in order to support my family. I tried to be a manager at a fast food restaurant that I worked at for several years prior to this, and although that I had all the experience and all the knowledge, I just didn't have the experience that they wanted of being a manager. So, knowing that, I ended up going to seeing a recruiter and joining the United States Marine Corps. So, I ended up not getting married yet because the recruiter had told me that it wasn't a good thing to go in being married. I'm not I can't remember what reason it was that he gave me, but he told me that they would not look at it uh, in a good light if I was to wait until after I got out of boot camp and then get married. So I ended up going to boot camp and spending 3 months there. I didn't find it very difficult. It was just sort of monotonous. As long as you kept your head on straight and did what you were told, and didn't ask any questions and didn't give any attitudes, you pretty much made it through. I was lucky enough from the get go to be placed in a position where I was in charge. I was, by one of my drill instructors, I was named a squad leader until I got to my actual platoon. And then somehow, some way, once I got to the platoon, they made me the guide. So the guide is the one that's in charge of the whole platoon when the drill instructor's not around. So pretty much you are the guy that's responsible for the other 50 to 60 other recruits that are in your platoon. After I ended up graduating the from boot camp, I came home, and it was really at that point that my father came back, I guess, into my life. He came to graduation as long as he came to graduation as along with my mother, my aunt, and my fiance and my brother. And once I got home, my fiance, she knew something was different about me. Um, just from the way that I was acting, I rode with my family from Paris Island all the way back up to Ohio, and they said that I never moved. I just sat there the whole time, just still. But after that, I ended up going to Camp Geiger for 2 weeks for infantry training. And then after that, I ended up coming back home again and being able to see my family. From there, I ended up going back to training down in Biloxi, Mississippi at Keesler Air Force Base. Now, when in boot camp, I had originally gotten orders to be a grunt, but then shortly thereafter, they looked at my testing scores and decided that my scores were too high, so they ended up sending me to weather school to be what's called a weather observer. So pretty much the only thing that I did that I was trained to do was I was trained to go outside, look up at the sky, and record what I saw in the sky a certain way. Now, it turns out that this was not what I wanted to do. I had originally signed up to be a firefighter, but I didn't get that job. Instead, I ended up getting weather. And I will tell you that eventually I fell in love with that job. So that was 3 months of training. And then after I got done with that training, I ended up coming home before I went to my first duty station and I ended up marrying my fiance. We actually went across the river into Kentucky because we were too young to get married yet. But over Kentucky, you only had to be 18, which we were at that, we were old enough to get married at that point. My best man for my wedding was actually our son. We had no witnesses, so the magistrate or the judge had to go next door and get a couple people to be our witnesses. And the magistrate said, "Don't worry, this happens all the time," and just went over and got a couple of his buddies to witness the marriage. We didn't even tell our family that we were getting married because we knew that they didn't want us to get married. So after that, I ended up driving out to California to my first duty station in Camp Pendleton, California. Took me 3 days to drive out there because I only drove 8 hours a day, and it's like a 24-hour trip. So once I got out there and checked in and everything, I filled out all my paperwork, and the military ended up flying my wife and my son out there to be with me. We ended up getting a place out in Murrieta, California, which is up in Riverside, which was about 30 minutes away from where I actually worked on base at Camp Pendleton. So we lived out there pretty much away from any military life or anything like that. And we did that because it was cheaper to live out there than it was to live around base. And we also couldn't get on base as of yet. So we lived out there for about a year, and I remember I remember the first furniture that we bought. We outfitted our whole apartment, and I'm talking the living room, the bedroom, the dining room, everything, for $1,200. We kept that furniture for a long time too. It followed us a few different places, and I think it even lasted long enough to where we were out of the military that we still had some of those pieces. Um, but while I was in, we had to learn we had to learn, one, how to be a married couple, two, how to be new parents with no family around, and three, how to adjust to the Marine Corps. I will tell you that at times it wasn't easy, and I look back on it now, and there are a lot of things that I wish that I would have done different. There are a lot of there's a lot of ways that I wish that I would have supported my wife and my son back then. I mean, we had a good life. You know, I took care of my family. I took care of my son. We played all the time, but I just think I could have spent a lot more time with him than what I did. I played a lot of basketball when I was there. Ended up, even playing on a Marine Corps team. Played softball while I was there. Played on a Marine Corps softball team. Eventually, after a year of being there, we got base housing and we moved on to base. We got a nice little apartment. It wasn't bad, but my wife, she made friends quickly with the couple downstairs, and they had a young kid who who played with our son, so they got along real well. Eventually, I got promoted, and I couldn't live there any longer because it was only for certain ranks. So I had to move to a totally different housing unit, which was a lot nicer and a lot newer. We moved there, and I will tell you that that part of my life, for some reason, I don't remember a lot of. I remember the house. I know we loved it at that place, but for some reason, that portion of my memory is sort of disappeared. Um, so shortly after living there, I think it was maybe about 6 months, I ended up getting orders to go overseas. The unfortunate part about that was that the overseas orders was unaccompanied, which means that my family could not come with me. So I had to send my family back home, and they lived with family while I ended up going overseas. I tried everything that I could to try and get the Marine Corps to give me orders. I even agreed to stay there for 3 years to in order to get my family over there with me, but they would not allow it. So I talked to my wife. I tried to talk to her almost every day, and eventually it did get to be too much on us being apart like that. I really couldn't afford to fly home, and I really couldn't afford to fly her to where I was at, which was in Japan. So at a certain point, it was discussed that we were going to actually separate. Um, that was hard on me. It was hard on her, and it was a tough time. I ended up staying in staying overseas for another year, and being deployed to a couple other places, and then eventually I got orders to come back and go to go to another school for another job. So I'd been promoted, so at this point I was a sergeant. And they wanted to send me back to school to become a weather forecaster. I ended up flying home to visit home beforehand, and I ended up meeting up with my wife. We went out one night, and it was that night that we sat, we discussed everything, and we decided that we did not want to be separated, that we did love each other too much. So it was at that night that we decided that we were not going to separate. We were going to make this work, and we were going to do everything that we possibly could. So I ended up flying back to Japan, getting everything taken care of, and then flying back home, where I ended up getting my family, and we ended up going back to Keesler Air Force Base in Biloxi, Mississippi for my training. So we lived there for 9 months before I ended up graduating from that school and getting orders. They wanted to send me back to Japan, but I told them I just came from there. I want to go somewhere else. And then we ended up getting orders to Kaneohe Bay, Hawaii, which is like a dream station. So me and my family ended up going out there, getting a nice little house that was only a couple blocks from the beach, and it also allowed our families to come out and visit us and have a place to stay. And but unfortunately, my family, they didn't really like flying, so they were not coming out. But luckily, her family, they got to come out. They got to stay with us a couple different times and enjoy Hawaii. Eventually, it got to the point um, where it was starting to become a little bit uh, too much for us again. I guess it was the fact of being away from family. So what it ended up happening was that I ended up getting injured while I was overseas, and it sort of caught up to me. And they told me that I would not be able to re-enlist. So they gave me the option of keep or staying in for my enlistment and then getting out, or they said that they would give me a package where I would get, I think it was like $30,000, and they would go ahead and separate me at that point, and then me and my family could go ahead and go back home, and I could start my civilian life. So I went ahead, I chose that, and we were going to move back to California, but unfortunately at that time my wife's mom was sick, and we didn't think that she was going to be around much longer. So we chose to come back to Ohio in order to, spend time with her. And we did that. We stayed with family for a while until we ended up getting set up with our own place. So what I would end up doing is I would end up stopping the video here at this point. It's pretty long at this point. And anyway, that's really going to cover our 20s in my military time. So we'll end up picking up what happens after the military, and which will bring us up to where we are today. So if no one else tells you, have a great day. I believe in you, and I have love for you. Until next video, I will see you then.